All right, now let's talk about the other team that was in the top 25 this week coming in. Auburn expected to be in the top 25, but voters again left them out. Instead, they voted Ole Miss, who is in the top 25 for the first time since 2019. Ole Miss beat Cal this weekend in San Antonio as part of the Hall of Fame series. Ole Miss is also one of the last four undefeated teams in the nation. Now, also at time of recording, that is true. We'll see what happens in the Troy game, but I would expect them to win that. But yeah, they're continuing to play well. Maddie, how high can Ole Miss climb once conference play starts?
This team really confuses me. We've seen them play a few quality opponents, and they were good games, like that win over Memphis, who, everybody thought there was no way Ole Miss was going to win that one. Um, when Memphis beat out a couple of SEC teams at this point in the season, but we've also seen them struggle against teams of a lesser caliber. So they will be playing with those waiver troubled players that we brought up earlier on this season through the rest of the year, which only improves their stock. But my big question is, will they be able to continue their success into conference play, which I think, moving forward, like you said, the Troy game, I don't think that's going to show us much. But I think the first few games in conference is going to tell us a lot about this team. I think they might be able to, like I said, with those waiver troubled players now officially being on the roster, is going to help them a ton. So I'm interested to see. It's one of those, like, you can flip a coin and I believe you heads or tails either way.
Yeah, so with Ole Miss, it's kind of a difficult spot. You can't point to a loss when you look at Ole Miss. And I know there's people out there who may be taking the easy answer when it comes to conference. Like, I'm just going to trust Chris Beard in that he's going to have a good team out there. But I think that's kind of there. You need to look a little bit harder at Ole Miss because like what they're doing is impressive, but what their numbers actually say is something completely different. And what their numbers are actually saying is that there's a lot of concern that I think under the water. Now, Chris Beard has scheduled what is a relatively easy schedule for Ole Miss, which he has every right to do, being a first year coach. It makes total sense. Yeah, I would do it. It's a way to start building a winning culture. It's a way to teach your guys how to win against some competition, that they're not used to seeing yet. And get themselves feeling good about themselves and everything else. Ole Miss is undefeated. There's no doubt about that. And they've won some games that, people have kind of counted them out on. But when I look at Ole Miss and I dive into those numbers, what I'm looking at is I'm looking at their offensive rating. I'm looking at their points per shot. I'm looking at their field goal attempts and their rebounding ability and their adjusted offense efficiency. And when I jump into those numbers, what those numbers really tell me is that this team is closer to the bottom half of the conference than it is to the top half of the conference, which really begins to worry me. And why I think this Ole Miss team really reminds me of, I'm an Arkansas fan, so I'll make the comparison that sticks out in my head first. Arkansas in their first year with Eric Musselman. That team played really well in non-conference overall. They did really well. I believe their only loss was to Western Kentucky on the road. They looked really good. They had a big win against Indiana that people were kind of counting them out of in that game back when Indiana had a little bit more going for them than what they do right now. But this team kind of reminds me of that, is that they're playing well against the competition that's in front of them, but their numbers actually indicate that they're a little bit closer to the middle of the pack on the 10 or really the 8 through 11 range is really where they are. They have problems rebounding the basketball. They're losing the rebound differential by negative 2.2 every game, which is about 12th in the SEC. They're really not that great of a shooting of a team. They sit at 45.4%. So if you can't shoot, you got to create more field goal attempts, and that involves rebounding the basketball, which they're not good at. But with the field goal attempts they're making per game, they sit about 10th in the SEC and making more chances per bucket. So it's a really inefficient offense when you break it down and try to go through all of that. And that's part of the learning curve with Ole Miss, I feel like. Do I think that they're going to beat some teams they should? That's actually exactly where they are. They're in a place where they're going to beat the teams they should most of the time and also win a couple of games that they shouldn't. Like that's kind of who Ole Miss is. It would not surprise me if this team's around like 500 come conference play when we're all said and done. And depending on who you beat, you could be somewhere as an 8 to 11 seed for the NCAA tournament. There's not really a strong resume point to point to in the non-conference. Your only quad one victory is against UCF on the road, which is really sitting on being quad two again. Depending on what happens with UCF, I don't think that one's going to stand. Memphis may has the opportunity to turn into a quad one. So you probably walked out of non-conference play when it comes March time with at least one not one non-conference quad one win. So it looks good. It's not great. So like they're going to have to keep winning games because numbers really don't like them. But overall, I think you have to be impressed with the job that Chris Beard's done in year one.
Yeah, for sure. For first year, they are flying through the non-conference, whether it's an easy or hard schedule, let that be, but they are nowhere near what anyone expected them to be at this point. So I think it's, something good for Ole Miss fans to take away. Like, hey, we're doing this great in year one. No matter what happens in conference, they've done excellent up to this point. Like you said, I think they're going to beat some teams that they're not supposed to. So I think that that's only, you know, kind of the silver lining to look forward to in the coming years because, these wins to start to non-conference is going to say extremely good things, especially when it comes to recruiting and just for their fan base in general.
I think it's a lot easier to explain to a recruiter or potential transfer, the amount of games you won than how much you won them by and your efficiency rating. That's probably a much easier conversation to have.
Mm,
But overall, if you're a basketball nut and get into the analytics like I am, you're kind of looking at Ole Miss waiting for a fall. If you're looking at the wins and losses, you got to feel good, which is why we had a lot of conversation about Ole Miss getting into the top 25 over the last couple of weeks,
mm.
particularly coming from Ole Miss fans. But